would like to bring up 2 points, one of which is supposed to be directed at people. However, the other one is to be directed at clinicians, such as psychologists, I don't know, psychotherapists, and the like. Well, here is my first point. Now I'm talking to people. Whatever symptom you're suffering from is completely related to the third phase of repression, which is called the returning of the repressed. And that would be the main title of this talk. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether it's depression, obsession, I don't know, or phobia, or panic, PTSD, and so on and so forth, because the list goes on. Whatever symptom you're suffering from is related to the returning of the repressed. That's that. Now, here is my second point. Now I'm talking to psychologists. You know, I have a question. Will it be really effective and reliable in the long run if you just try working symptom orientedly? In other words, will it be really actually reliable if you try your utmost to focus on the client's symptoms in order to resolve them? Because, as far as I can tell, the third phase of repression, which is known as the returning of the repressed, this phase says something else altogether. Well, hello and welcome to my clinic. My full name is Hooshang.Jahanpanah. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work in two fields, clinical psychoanalysis and also psychoanalytic psychotherapy. This is part 7 of a video lecture series regarding the phenomenon of repression in clinical psychoanalysis. The main title of this video is called The Third Phase of Repression. In other words, the returning of the repressed. Over the course of my talk, during this session, in the course of this session, I'm going to talk about these items. First and foremost, a binary concept, which is banishment versus return. Afterwards, I'm going to talk about two analogies through which the late Sigmund Freud tried to clarify the upward pressure applied by the unconscious. Then I'm going to cover five pathways for the returning of the repressed. And finally, the same as always, at the end of this video, you will be notified of the next video topic as well. Let's get started. All right. With respect to the binary concept of banishment versus return, or let's say forcing out or rejection versus return, firstly, I must say that this binary concept is based on an article which has been written by Professor Salman Akhtar. This article entitled Repression, a Critical Assessment and Updates of Freud's 1915 paper. It's been published in the Journal of the American Psychoanalytical Association in 2020. Well, based on this article, the binary concept of banishment versus return actually could help us to understand the phenomenon of repression way better. You know, according to Sigmund Freud, there are two probable outcomes for the material which undergoes repression. One of which is that the repressed is banished from consciousness, unlike the other probable outcome, which is the returning of the repressed, or let's put it this way, In this case, I mean, the second outcome is that the repressed returns to the consciousness. Well, as to the banishment process, there are two types of banishment. One of which is the banishment which might lead to the drive become inactive. It might lead to the drive become dormant. In this case, the drive is very slightly connected with mental energy, or let's say libido. So the first sort of banishment is the one which leads to the drive become inactive. And the point is that the drive is connected with mental energy, but very slightly. In this manner, drive remains dormant. And, uh, there is no upward pressure for entering the consciousness in this case. There is little force towards action, and there is no upward pressure for entering the consciousness. However, there is another sort of banishment, which is, in this case, the drive remains active. This sort of banishment lead to the drive remain active. And in this state, the drive representative, that is to say your thoughts, memories, images, and the like, the drive representative actually grows uninhibitedly. In other words, drive representatives in this manner, they proliferate in the dark. And this might, and this way, the drive representative might take on more complicated and extreme forms. So that's about the concept of banishment. Now, with regard to the returning of the repressed, Freud stated that the repressed applies a continuous pressure in the direction of the consciousness. Freud said so a couple of times, that the repressed applies or exerts a continuous pressure in the direction of consciousness. And in order to clarify this important issue, he gave two analogies, one of which is about a heckler, that he brought up this analogy in his article entitled 5 Lectures on Psychoanalysis. This article has been published in 1910. And the other analogy is about a cork, actually very little piece of wood which you put at the top of a bottle of water or whatever. The late Sigmund Freud actually draw this analogy, I mean cork analogy, in his article entitled Introductory Lectures of Psychoanalysis. This one has been published in 1916. Well, with respect to the first analogy, which is about a heckler, firstly, I should say that what I mean by a heckler is a person who interrupts a public speaker on and on with mocking or, let's say, humorous comments. This is what I mean by a heckler. Here is the analogy. A heckler who is ordered out of an auditorium, but the point is that after being locked out, they keep banging on the door. See the upward pressure of the repressed in the direction of consciousness? The second analogy is about a cork, as I just told you. This one, I mean, through this analogy, Freud tries to describe the upward pressure much more. You know, a quirk which you try your utmost, which you do your best. What I mean by you is the subject. The subject tries their utmost to keep the cork underwater. All right? So a cork which is forcibly submerged into water. But the point is that as of the second that the pressure keeping it down is lessened, it pops up all the way up again. It rises to the surface of the water as of the second that the pressure is lessened. See the continuous actually pressure which is exerted by the repressed. That's about the analogies. Now, just one more point. Therefore, the repressed material, this is the point that must be taken into account. This point has to be considered actually significantly. Therefore, the repressed seeks expression. It seeks manifestation. Having said that, the term manifestation reminds me of the symptom. Anyway, the repressed seeks expression, even if this expression has to occur in a modified form, in an altered form. All right, there are 5 pathways, as I said at the beginning of my talk, for the returning of the repressed, including parapraxes, dreams, negation, unconscious derivatives, and finally, the 5th one, transferences. So the unconscious repressed material returns to the consciousness through these 5 pathways. First and foremost, I would prefer to describe the meaning of parapraxes in clinical psychoanalysis. The question which crosses my mind in this case is that what is meant by the term parapraxes in clinical psychoanalysis? What does the term mean? You know, when speaking of parapraxes in psychoanalysis, we do not mean all failures of the subject's memory, speech, and action. Not at all. No. What we merely include by this term, what we merely mean by the term parapraxes is just those acts which you're typically able to perform successfully, without a mistake, without any failure. So that is what parapraxes is about. Those acts which you're usually actually capable of performing successfully. Okay? Mm-hmm. And no wonder in these cases you are inclined to attribute the failure to just lack of concentration, or you're willing to actually attribute the failure in these cases, you're willing to attribute the failure to sheer coincidence. No wonder you're willing to do so in these cases. So that's about the very summarized and brief meaning of the term parapraxes. The point is that we do not mean all failures of memory, speech, and action. No. And and as far as I know, there are different types of parapraxes, which so far I could prepare a list of uh, the phenomenon of parapraxes. Probably you can add to these items as well, but so far this is my list. Different types of parapraxes, such as when you forget some specific names or intentions temporarily. Temporarily. So this is not about forgetting things permanently. No. When you forget some specific names or intentions temporarily, this is a type of parapraxis. Or it could be the slip of the pen. You're writing, I don't know, something. You're taking down some notes. All of a sudden, you might become aware of a word or more than that, which you didn't mean to write, which you didn't actually write it intentionally. So it is called slip of the pen. Or it could be slip of the tongue. While I'm talking, probably some words actually slip out of my mouth, and uh, immediately afterwards, I actually correct them. This is slip of the tongue. The point is that when I'm talking, those words which uh, slip out of my mouth, I didn't mean to say so. I didn't say those words actually willingly or intentionally. It just slips out of my mouth. So it is called slip of the pen. Or it could be actually another type of parapraxis. It could be bungled action or faulty function. And I forgot to tell you one point, no problem. I'm going to say it right now. There are different terms for describing actually parapraxis. You might have heard the same phenomenon differently. I mean, in another term, which is Freudian slips, bungled actions, faulty functions, or parapraxis. They are all the same, different terms for describing the same phenomenon. Well, the other type of parapraxis could be called faulty function. I'm sorry, yes, faulty function or faulty action or bungled action. What appears to be a bungled action, as a matter of fact, where is it? Mhm. What appears to be bungled actions, as a matter of fact, on another level, they are quite successful. Not only they are not, let's say, bungled, they are not mistakes, but they are quite successful because this way the unconscious wishes are fulfilled. The unconscious wishes, the unconscious intentions could be fulfilled through these apparent bungled actions. Therefore, in this case, the point is that uh, actually they are not, they are merely apparent mistakes. But on another level, they are actually quite precise. And the German term for faulty function, the German term for faulty function, uh, I don't want to pronounce the term because I don't know a word of German language. That's why I don't like pronouncing the term because definitely I'm going to read it in a wrong way. But this is what I can say for the time being. The German term for faulty function is understood by Freud as connoting not only acts proper but also all kinds of errors and slips in speech or in your actions. Well, so this is important. What Freud means by the term bungled action or faulty function, this one is better. What Freud means by the term faulty function is not the acts proper. No. All kinds of failures and actually errors of your mental operations. All of them. Uh, And the last type of parapraxis, according to the list which I could prepare so far, is called mislaying. And this is about losing objects. So that's about the different types of parapraxes. Freud showed that parapraxes, just like symptoms, they are compromise formations. They result from the conflict between your conscious intentions and whatever which has been repressed. So they are very actually similar to symptoms, parapraxes and symptoms, because they are compromise formations and they originate from, they result from the antagonism between the subject's conscious intentions and whatever material which has been repressed. So that's about the first pathway for the returning of the repressed. But one more point. The bottom line about parapraxes is that they are represented by an absence. Parapraxes are represented by an absence. They are substitute replacements for something else. This could be a bottom line for parapraxes. A substitute replacements for something else. Now, regarding the second pathway for the returning of the repressed, uh, I should say your dreams. While you're sleeping and having dreams, the repressed returns, the repressed comes out. But the point is that it comes out after being altered by some defense mechanisms, such as displacement, or it could be called metonymy, displacement or metonymy in literature, or another defense mechanism which is called condensation or metaphor. So I'm going to say it one more time. While you are having dreams, when you go to sleep, while you're having dreams, the repressed comes out, but after being altered by these defense mechanisms, displacement or metonymy, and condensation or metaphor or symbolism. Through these mechanisms, the repressed comes out while having dreams. The third pathway for the returning of the repressed is negation. You know, in this case, the repressed is allowed entry into consciousness, but only in its inverted form. Only in its inverted form. Through that, through negation, the repressed material returns to consciousness. But the point is that it only returns to consciousness. It only returns to the consciousness in its inverted form. Let me make an example to actually make this pathway a bit more clear. While I'm talking to a friend of mine, I don't know, my family member or whoever else, all of a sudden I say sentences like this. Like, this doesn't mean that, blah, 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 blah. This doesn't mean that, blah, blah, blah. Or if I come up with a sentence like, I didn't mean to say, or I do not mean to say this and that. This is negation. This means that something is about to enter to consciousness, but given that it is impossible, it comes out, it enters to my consciousness in its inverted form. That's why I emphasize on points like, I do not mean to say this, or this doesn't mean blah, blah, blah. Okay? So that's about the negation. The next pathway for the returning of the repressed is called unconscious derivatives. In this case, the unconscious tends to push some products back to consciousness, including your symptoms. So your symptoms is the unconscious derivatives. Your symptoms are some derivatives of the unconscious, or it could be your free associations during psychoanalytic sessions or fantasies. They are all derivatives of your unconscious. So I'm going to repeat this pathway one more time. The unconscious material, through some derivatives, tend to push some products back to consciousness. What is meant by products is your fantasies or your symptoms or the free associations which you have through your psychoanalytic sessions. This way, the unconscious derivatives allow the repressed, they allow the repressed to express itself. But the point is that in a less emotionally charged variables, in a less emotionally charged variables. And finally, the 5 pathway for the returning of the repressed is the phenomenon of transference. Speaking of transferences, honestly speaking, it has got a very long story. And the term transference is one of the most fundamental concepts of clinical psychoanalysis. And I personally think that one of the most fundamental differences between different approaches when it comes to clinical psychoanalysis is completely pertinent to the way you deal with the client's transferences. It is completely related to the way you manage the client transferences, and also it is based on the way you describe the term transferences. That's why I cannot wrap it up by just mentioning some sentences. No. Uh, Given that, or let's say in light of the importance of this fundamental concept in psychoanalysis, most probably I'm going to talk about this term much more. I mean, over the course of 2 or 3 more sessions, but not right now, in future. But in order to say something about this pathway as well, I can say that through your transferences, the repressed attaches itself to a fresh object. Through your transferences, the repressed material attaches itself to a fresh object. And this way, it gives the aim a rationalized tenor. That's about the 5 pathway for the returning of the repressed. And finally, before saying goodbye, next session topic or title, next video title is still about the phenomenon of repression in clinical psychoanalysis, but this time the repression is actually elaborated on through Jacques Lacan perspective. So next time I'm going to see you with the perspective of Jacques, the late French psychoanalyst, Jacques Lacan, about the phenomenon of repression. That's it for now. See you soon, next week, and have a good time.